Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirk Pattycake. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today we're doing the ninth book. The second book in the list of banned books, the ninth book on the 2021 list by ALA for the most challenged and banned books of 2021. I know I was kind of redundant there. But so these are the top 10 books that were challenged in schools for various reasons. We don't know the grades, we don't know if they were pulled from classrooms, from libraries, or from the curriculum. We just know that they were pulled. We also don't know geographical location. So that makes it really hard to kind of gauge anything other than the generic information that the ALA posted on their website, which the link to the ALA's most banned or challenged books list will be down in the description below, as well as the cover of as well as your way to find this book. But before we get started, just a couple of things. Number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. There are two main ways. Number one is through LMFAO, where I give you a prompt every month and you come up with a short story or submit a short story that fulfills the prompt. And on the first Monday of the month, we read those stories together. The second way is if you are an indie author and you've got a book out or a book coming out, submit the first chapter and the cover, and they will be read here on the channel to hopefully help readers find your stuff. If you'd like to submit any topics about writing or writing advice or anything for me to react to that relates to creativity of this sort, of any sort, there is also a link down there to submit a topic to me that I will hopefully get to as soon as I can. And then the third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my creative work, there are links down in the description below to where you can find them and my author's name. You can get them at any of your favorite book places, including the libraries. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. The last book I did for this was Beyond Magenta, which you can see the book review for that here on the channel, or the book walkthrough, whatever we want to call these. Today's it will be Juno Dawson's This Book is Gay. This book is described online as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, straight, curious. This book is for everyone, regardless of gender or sexual preference. This book is for anyone who's ever dared to wonder. This book is for you. This candid, funny, and uncensored exploration of sexuality and what it's like to grow up LGBT also includes real stories from people across the gender and sexual spectrum, not to mention hilarious illustrations. Inside this revised and updated edition, you'll find the answers to all your questions you've ever wanted to ask, with topics like stereotypes, the facts and the fiction, coming out as LGBT, where to meet people like you, the ins and outs of gay sex, how to flirt, and so much more. You will be entertained and you will be informed, but most importantly, you will know that however you identify or don't, and whomever you love, you are exceptional. You matter. And so does this book. I feel like that is such a gross misrepresentation of what's in this book to what to expect based on what I experienced. Why are blurbs always so misleading? Look, I can promise you that my blurbs basically introduce you to like the first third of the story-ish. Pretty much to the end of the first act, I think. But this is just like, no. Also, so to keep in mind with this is it says on the Amazon page that this book is targeted towards 14 to 17-year-olds. That is the target audience. However, it's written like it's talking to a 5-year-old, and it actually is more targeted to 11 to 14-year-olds. Within this book, it says that is the main demographic that it's important to talk to about being gay, and it also says that it would prefer to sort of be in that age range. So keep that in mind as we go through what this book actually is. In the introduction, the author says that this is a guidebook, like a tour guide on what it's like to be gay before you get there, but also you don't have to be gay to read it. There's also some of the author going, I kissed and made out with and fantasized about guys before knowing that I was gay, so maybe you will too. That should be noted that because it's talking about, it'll say that maybe you're looking at this book before you find out that you're gay. It's also going to say that most of the time, or a lot of the time, there's a graph in this book that says most of these kids come out when they are like 13, or when they are 10 to 15. That is the majority of the pie chart in this book. So if that is what it's saying, then the target audience for this falls in that age group because it wants to educate before somebody comes out, if that makes sense. Chapter 1 is called Welcome to the Club. This book declares itself an instruction manual from the start, saying it's the thing that you should get in your grab bag when you come out as gay, along with your membership card. Already, this book sounds like it's talking to really, really young people, and it came off very cringe. Quote, Schools probably haven't taught you very much about what it's like to be a lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, or questioning. You may have heard about famous gay people or seen same-sex couples on TV. You almost certainly know an LGBT person, even if you aren't aware of it. Like an alien invasion, we are already among you. We serve you in the post office. We teach you math. We make your hamburgers. End quote. And then, you know what? I am personally offended that the author then tries to claim that emo music and eyeliner specifically belong to gay. Because you're wrong. They are universal. We don't have to split this into anything. They are just there. Though I will give the author credit because at this point he says, if people aren't allowed to say what's really on their minds for fear of upsetting people, then we'll end up never saying anything at all. Surprisingly a based take, and I'm glad that it's here. In It's one of the reasons why I think discussing any of these books on the banned book list has become a new impossible task. So thank you to the author for saying that, for inviting the conversation about these books, about these topics, and what is really going on here. This book says that coming out is about freedom to be who and what you want to be. Then, quote, whatever you identify as by the end of this book, which implies to me a guidance in selecting an identity through this reading. This is a legitimate instruction manual, as it claims on the first page of chapter 1. It doesn't even try to hide it. This book laments that straight is the default assumption in relationship conversations, before then bringing up that LGBT adults make up 3.5% of the American population, approximately. That's like wondering why meat's usually the default menu for most restaurants because vegetarians exist. The author then talks about how his first gay crush was Dean Cain from Superman, and now he understands how One Direction fans feel on Twitter. The author mentions again that this book is meant to build a community, and transgenders are mentioned in this book because they go through a similar trial as the gays when coming out. Then comes a list of things no one ever says that just came off as resentment to me, like, when did you realize that you were straight? You know? People from an outsider's perspective generally ask these questions. And since we've already established in the book what the majority perspective is, it's kind of weird to receive these kinds of questions. You commonly get this stuff if you're a Christian or any type of religion from someone who isn't religious. It's also kind of odd to complain about, lol, I went to a straight wedding this weekend, when earlier in this book, the author already proclaimed that he liked talking about being gay and that all gays like talking about being gay. So then to resent that nobody says, I went to a straight wedding this weekend, because you don't have to say when you go to a straight wedding. Technically, you also don't have to say that you went to a gay wedding. You could just say that you went to a wedding. The only thing is that it's wanting to paint specifically what you're doing. Like, for me, you don't have to say that a book is gay if there's a gay character in it. You can just say it's a book, tell me about the book. But then you're marketing something specifically when you say, I have this gay book. But that's just me. Quote, it may be because you already identify as LGBT, and let's face it, we love nothing more than talking about ourselves. End quote. That's just to show that he likes talking about it. So, like, if you like saying, I went to a gay wedding specifically, that's fine, that's on you, but like, don't resent other people for not saying they specifically went to a straight wedding, because they don't put that at the top of their I need to tell people list. Which is just a way of me saying that no one forces anyone to say they went to a gay wedding instead of just saying they went to a wedding. So why is there resentment here? Chapter 2 is called The Name Game, where the author opens the chapter by saying no matter who you fantasize about, that doesn't define your sexual interest. Quote, I've thought about sleeping with women, but I'm still a gay man, end quote. But in the previous chapter, the author said wandering is the first step. So clearly thinking has something to do with this, right? Because now he's saying once you identify your sex thoughts, now you gotta think that if you're gonna take action or come out or do nothing. But what if those sex thoughts don't mean anything like the ones that he was saying about when he thinks about women? It seems the implication of hiding something only goes one way. The author also says once you realize that you have gay thoughts, you have 3 options. Do nothing and hope those thoughts go away. Acknowledge your thoughts and act on them, but just do it for yourself. Or 3, act on your thoughts and make it your entire identity so that you can have friends. No one wants to be alone, right? Be a community. Because, you know, that's what you gotta, if you want to not be alone, you have to make it your entire identity. Otherwise, you're basically a straight person, even if you're in a gay relationship. This book then says that it thinks a lot of homophobes are actually gay. This book also implies that if you don't want to make your entire identity about being gay, then it's basically like living in the closet and it's stressful. You want a community, don't you? It's really manipulative. The book straight up says, quote, if you meet someone who doesn't think about sex, they're probably liars, end quote. This book should be called This Book is Judgmental as Frick. Depending on the age of the person and really how sexually involved or preoccupied they are, yeah, author, some people do go through their day without thinking about sex, and it's people like this author making claims like this that make people think there's something weird or wrong with them if they're not obsessed with boning somebody every single day, all the time. Like, there is something wrong with Akatar for being so obsessed with sex. There is something wrong with, his name is Augustin, for all of the like random sexual conversations. There is something wrong with Leather and Lace and Guns and Smoke for its preoccupation with sex that reads like sex addiction. And it's people that are treating sex addiction like it's the normal way of thinking, so that you're a freak if you are not preoccupied with sex all the time. I got people asking me questions about my sex life or what I identify as just because I'm not thirsty. Get out of here with your thirsty trash. It goes into a brief tirade about how labels are dumb and you can do whatever you want and not have to stick to a label, but this book is a label, and this whole thing is about joining the label club, and then, oh, looks like labels don't matter. But also, let's go through the list of labels just in case you want one, even though they don't matter, but you need one. So then the book goes over what lesbian, gay, bi, queer, curious, asexual, trans, and intersex mean. It continues to say that young people should think more about what does it for them in order to solve a lot of problems. This person genuinely does not believe that everyone else doesn't think about sex as much as they do. He describes asexual as either, quote, a lack or little sexual interest in sex, or the refusal to define your sexual orientation or uncertainty, end quote. He then goes on to describe that transgenderism only exists because society has taught that there are differences between men and women that don't actually exist. This, to me, says that he thinks there is no reason a trans person exists except because it's not socially acceptable in some places for men to wear dresses. And if only it was socially acceptable, then there would be no transgender women. This says to me that he thinks gender dysphoria does not exist. Quote, advertisers would like us to believe that being female somehow feels different to being male, but we will never really know. Culture tells our parents how to dress us as kids, and it becomes ingrained. It sometimes seems bonkers to me to think that a dude would have to be trans to put on a skirt or some heels. Who bloody says that they are female attire? Sadly, as most of the world is blind to how small-minded this is, that's the way the cookie crumbles. For now. End quote. So this also says that intersex isn't an identity, but a label. But everything else here was called a label before getting into them. Then it briefly suggests that intersex issues are related to trans issues because some intersex people don't agree with the gender that they are raised as. Doesn't that just make them trans issues, though? After going on about labels, he finishes with, quote, however you identify, be it lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, asexual, curious, or carrot, we all have something in common. We are a minority, and we have made a brave step to identify as such. We have refused to hide and made a declaration of who we are. End quote. Chapter 3 is called You Can't Mistake Our Biology. This chapter is going to go on about the biological background of being gay, first by referencing a highest priestess, Lady Gaga, and then RuPaul's Institute of Gay Heritage Technology. However, this starts out by completely contradicting the last chapter where it says your identity is always changing and developing and you can pick and choose your labels as you want. But then in this chapter it says that you're born that way. So which is it? It references a couple of things like the twin study, chromosome linkage, epigenetics, having lots of brothers, pheromones, brain structure, prenatal hormones, and doesn't go into any of them in any detail. It says, biology predisposes us to like certain things, evolutionary theory. Then it goes over the biological differences between gay people and straight people. This includes brain hemisphere sizes. Gay men apparently have longer and thicker dicks on average. Gay men are more responsive to porn, and finger length may vary between lesbian and gay women. Then it also mentions some biological differences trans people have had that have been recorded with doctors, but also says I'm not big into the But then it goes on to say, I'm not big into biological determination. So while acknowledging that there are differences, this book also then dismisses them. How are you going to tell me that there is no difference between male and female, how are you going to tell me that there is no biological difference between male and female and you're not really that into biological determination, but also have a whole section on how there's a biological difference between gay and straight? Chapter 4 is called Stereotypes Are Poo. This chapter is about how stereotyping is bad and ends up using stereotypes to try and dispel other stereotypes, such as saying, stereotype, gay men are pedophiles. Answer, this age-old chestnut. Some deeply homophobic people truly believe this is the case. Think about it. You know what gay men like? Big, hairy men with big peckers. You know who have none of these attributes? Kids. Gay men like men. That's the whole point. End quote. Trading one stereotype for another isn't true, but that specifically kind of delegitimizes otters and twinks and all the other sorts of gay body types just to try to dispel another stereotype. So can we just be honest in discussions about everything? It also tries to say that there's never a reason to use a descriptive word like Muslim terrorist because it just creates more stereotyping. I'm pretty sure though that type of phrasing is to identify the motive of the attacker, just like if you would say right-wing terrorist. Motives in crimes do kind of matter, so labeling isn't always terrible, especially in the case of the situation. There's a section on subculture versus stereotype because all stereotypes come from some grain of truth is what the book says. It's here that it also says the world is largely run by and for straight white men or the patriarchy and does not elaborate. Is that not another stereotype? Move into a section describing gay subcultures like bears, otters, subs, twinks, lipstick lesbians, muscle berries, butches, and scallies. And also saying, quote, most gays are none of these things. The author then says, you can pick which stereotype to adhere to because they're actually made from generations of people existing in this way. Again, we're talking about putting on however many labels you want. The book then asks the reader to draw a picture of a gay person and then lectures if anyone drew a picture of a gay man in leather or a butch woman or a posh man with a limp wrist because, quote, most gays have had to be invisible for history so they blended in like body snatchers, only not evil. End quote. It finishes by saying, thinking all gays look the same is homophobic. No one here said that all gays look however the person drew them. You have an activity and then lecture people about expression. It's so bizarre because it's introducing this idea that, yeah, some people do fall into these stereotypes and you can choose which ones you want to be a part of, but also don't acknowledge them or you're a bigot. That's basically what's set up in the way that this book is written. Then you go over to these subcategories like camp. The author proceeds to say that even people who don't think that they're obviously gay in camp are still obviously gay in camp, even if they deny it. Quote, whatever the origin of camp, it's fair to say that however butch gay men think they are, total strangers are often more than able to spot a gay chap at 20 paces, especially if they themselves are gay. If you were to ask 100 gay men, do you think you're camp though? They'd scratch their testicles, adopt a tone 10 decibels lower than normal and say, "Nar, mate, not me." I estimate possibly 3 or 4 might say, "Oh, sometimes, if I've had a drink." End quote. I'm so confused what the author is trying to do here, as he says that stereotypes suck, but also embrace them, but also if you recognize them, you're homophobic, but also why do we reject our own labels and stereotypes? They're part of our history, but also you can imbibe on whatever you want, but also don't. Quote, gay men seem terrified of being camp. They plaster their Grindr profiles with straight acting and frantically grow beards. More on hypermasculinity in a moment. The census seems to be that while we think camp is great for chat show hosts, we don't want to bum it. Is this simply roaring misogyny? Do gay men just hate women and anything stereotypically female? Living in a male-dominated world seems to have infected us with the notion that anything male is better. Is this why some gay women also reject feminine norms and chase down the characteristics of the dominant group on the planet, men? I don't think so. I think it's far worse. I think that we hate ourselves. Bummer, right? But that isn't our fault. After decades of being told in all sorts of ways that gay men are less than straight men, we've turned that hate inwards. We aren't rejecting female traits, we're rejecting stereotypical ones. We might not all like all of our stereotypes, but they are ours. They belong to us. The rest of the world is so shady about gay people that, love or hate it, I think that we could all be a little bit more supportive of gay culture. Let me tell you something, boys and girls, you can straight act all you want, but if you are sleeping with your own sex, To the rest of the world, you're as gay as John Waters, living in a pink tent with Claire balding while watching Drag Race. So he's like, you're a bigot if you drew somebody that looked like a stereotypical gay on this activity, but also if you don't act like a stereotype, then you're basically just pretending that you're not gay, but everybody hates you anyway. So just like lean into the stereotype. That's what this is saying to me. So I'm not sure what this author is trying to say other than embrace stereotypes, but also don't. But also, if you reject stereotypes, then you're rejecting who you are. Stereotypes are bad, and you can express yourself however you want, but also, if you don't show that you're gay in some way, then you're straight acting, and you're not being yourself, and you're demonizing other gay people. This feels so much like it's trying to shove someone in a box of a certain behavior or way of expressing themselves and telling them not to act like themselves if it's not the right kind of expression. The author discourages people from going to the gym or caring about their bodies because, quote, no one's ever gotten to the point where they're happy with the way that they look. It's so fake. A six-pack never made anyone happy. No one ever got to the stage of the gym where they said, I did it. I am now satisfied. Maybe some of us got hooked on the idea that true happiness is just one gym session away and we can keep going, end quote. And then this book goes into how a lot of gay men use steroids to achieve a certain body type because they are so vain. The author also goes on to say how they think steroid users are freaky looking. Other subcategories, because that is what we're talking about here, include women fighting women about whether or not to adhere to gender stereotypes because butch versus feminine, and the stereotype of man-hating lesbian, the join us desire of lesbians wanting to add in a random man because pornography, and then lesbian versus gay wars about one thinking they're better than the other. Then about how bisexuals get the short end of the stick from everything in the community, not considered gay enough to be part of it, but also looking indecisive to people. The chapter ends by saying, regardless of your stereotypes, always be true to yourself. I'm not sure what the thesis of this chapter was because it went back and forth on saying, do this, but don't do this, but also don't dress like this, but also whatever you want, but also Chapter 5, The Fear. This chapter 5 is called The Fear, and it is literal, and it literally opens up with, quote, I hope I've sold this LGBT thing pretty well. You get to be a part of an avant-garde subculture with links to art, music, and fashion, but most importantly, you will be at one with who you really are. You are finally you, end quote. This is so gross because, one, it's a sales pitch to pull people into the LGBT. That is what that is. Like, it's not a club to be joined, but this is treating it like it's a club. And two, trying to convince kids that you can't be yourself unless you are gay. This is so manipulative. Now, it's time to talk about homophobia and transphobia within this chapter. This person says that they can't imagine anyone being born phobic, so it has to be outside sources. You know what would help in creating an understanding and a dialogue? By not making assumptions like this and actually talking to people about why they might feel or respond to things the way that they do. It might be uncomfortable. It might be offensive. But considering this book is about having uncomfortable conversations, why would you not speak to opposing opinions to better understand someone unlike you whom you can't possibly fathom why they think that they do, instead of assuming why they behave the way that they do and then going, I don't know, they're just bigots. You can't solve a problem if you refuse to acknowledge why someone might feel or act the way that they do. Whether or not you agree with it, you can't solve a problem that way. The book claims that being homophobic is illegal when it says, quote, inciting hatred is a criminal act, end quote. I'm not sure what that means. It also disregards religious beliefs and makes assumptions, and then it makes strawman arguments like that some homophobes think gay people will crawl down their chimneys and somehow convert them like gay vampires. I know this author is trying to be funny and mentioned it before, but you're also actually talking about real people when you act like this. Like, you're trying to cover real issues, which makes it very difficult to talk about in a serious sense when you don't actually create them as real people, but as caricatures that only believe that they're going to be knocked out and their organs stolen on the black market because blah, 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 blah. Are you going to treat others that disagree with you or that may not understand you as real people to have that conversation? There's then an activity in this book that asks the reader to write all of the words that they know about gay people and straight people, like labels for them, on 2 separate body forms. The author says, there's probably nothing insulting that you wrote about straight people except for breeders, and that's because because they run society. The narrator goes on to say how there's all of this hate in the world and how you're a better person if you see the hate and reject it. The book also complains about how, quote, heteronormative values are forced down our throats from birth. Cinderella gets together with a dude that she met once and lied to. The Little Mermaid rejects her entire culture for a bloke. That Princess Trick even goes for a spot of bestiality and makes out with a frog. But there are no LGBT role models for kids, end quote. That's trying too hard to be insulting and take everything in the worst possible light that you can. Then it complains about not learning about gay icons and historical figures in school. You know, I'd think in school you'd be learning about the people not because of what their sexuality is, but because of their impact and contributions during their life, because discussing people's sex lives is over the line of privacy and is not important to understanding impact and how somebody contributed to society. It is the personal facet of their life that is not necessary. The book complains that the world makes you feel weird by being different from the norm. I don't understand the point of this argument because you shouldn't feel weird about being abnormal if you're fine. And by normal, I mean the status quo. Behaviors, interests, expressions, etc. can be typical or atypical. You don't need to pretend that atypical is typical to say I'm fine with this. It reminds me of a time at work when I was talking to a security guard and I described myself as weird. Just the way that I dress is sometimes weird. I get social rejections, and I know that. I understand that. I warn people about some of my idiosyncrasies to prepare them for kind of the way that I talk or the way that I think, because I've been misunderstood enough. It still never helps. But I understand. I have been a black sheep, even in my family, and I'm fine with it. I've been kicked out of church more times than I can fit on one hand. Just because I'm different. But when I said that I was weird and I knew it, the security guard goes, "Oh, no, you're not." Like it was negative. It's not a negative. It's just what it is, and I understand how I am, but this book presents the norm and even says straight is 95% of the population or more, and then pretends that anything deviating from the supermajority wouldn't be considered different or abnormal. The dictionary definition of those words are normal, conforming to the standard or the common type, usual, not abnormal, regular, natural. Abnormal is not normal, average, typical, or usual, deviating from the standard. So if 95% is the standard, then if you're not that, you're abnormal, which isn't a bad thing. The chosen one is abnormal, so we can recognize what these words mean without accrediting positive. So can we recognize what these words mean without accrediting positive or negative value to them? I don't care that I'm different. I don't find myself inferior because I'm different, and I don't care if other people find me kind of abnormal. It is what it is, and I'm fine with it. This was something that also came up in Beyond Magenta, where they were constantly feeling like they were weird, and they had to come up with an explanation as to why they were weird. You don't need one. You're just you. And that's how also I approach every single person that I approach, is I get people apologizing to me for their idiosyncrasies or the way that they are, and I'm like, bro, you're just you. You don't need to apologize for being you. I'm not comparing you to anything. You're just you. So why is this book making it out to be this big deal when it's not? Instead of helping people feel comfortable with who they are and how they are, this book wants to make you feel bad and then court you into its arms. Other things that this chapter talks about include gay people pretending to be straight, paranoia, how straight is the norm that people feel like they have to conform to. Then it goes into a brief discussion of where AIDS came from, though it doesn't make any citations of where that information came from. It is also interesting that it will go on about how it's ignorant assholes who will associate HIV and AIDS with being gay, but it also doesn't talk about bug chasers or the kink in the community that does exist for some in knowingly infecting people who don't know with AIDS. Not all, and I'm not trying to say all, but it is a risk factor that you have to think about when it comes in. But it is a risk factor that you think might come in here when we're talking about risk factors of being gay and AIDS specifically, and not just demonizing people one way, right? But it doesn't come up. The next section of the book discusses bullying and abuse with instructions on confronting people who say things like "that's so gay" or "no homo," and praising the person as brave for confronting others. This recognizes that bullying in school is likely not specifically because most people are homophobic, but just that kids are mean and will find anything that they can to make somebody feel lesser. It goes on to describe different forms of homophobic and transphobic bullying, which is just a list of any kind of bullying. So I don't know why it needs a specific qualifier. The list is just regular normal bullying time. Then it gives recommendations for what to do if you're being bullied. Then it says school sucks for everyone, so just pretty much ignore it. Now, I just gotta ask, when we have this consensus of how damaging and terrible school is, why do we let it keep operating the way that it does? You tell me. The book then moves on to a brief section on if there's discrimination in the workplace, where it says LGBT is a protected characteristic, quote, which I like because it makes us sound like a beautiful rare butterfly on the verge of extinction in a Java or something, end quote. The section in this book also goes over statistics of hate crime or incident and bullying, but it doesn't cite anything like you're supposed to for this sort of thing. There's a roundup at the end of the chapter to talk about these things, but there are no proper citations listed, and there is nothing listed at the end of the book for the bibliography. Something disturbing at the end of this chapter is the statement, quote, hopefully as tolerance, understanding, and visibility of LGBT people increases, homophobia will die out with the ignorant people it lingers in, end quote. So, there's nothing in here about learning to get along, learning to coexist despite differences. None of that. The message is consistently agree or die. Hopefully people I don't like will die, and people I don't understand are just evil idiots. Can we not go with that assumption, go with that version? Can we, actually talk and understand that we can disagree and not hate or want people to die for it? Is that too much to ask? Maybe. For a book talking about hatred to only propagate its message through hatred and alienation, it's hard. Negativity and meanness are hard for me to deal with. Surprisingly, I know, because people want to assume the worst of me if I disagree or ask questions, and I can't do anything right, and my intentions are always skewed. That's just how it is, and then they kind of just, you gotta move along with it. Chapter 6 is called Haters Gonna Hate. This chapter starts out by saying there are more than self-loathing reasons why someone might not identify as LGBT. Mostly bigotry, though, and only Christians. This book says it's only Christianity that spread and conquered. This book says it's only Christianity that spread and then conquered that made people homophobic. No one else in the history of ever has ever been homophobic, period. The author briefly mentions Alan Turing, saying that the man fought in World War II and was a great inventor. The author does a massive disservice by not talking about Alan Turing's technical and mathematical advancements, because he was kind of a revolutionary guy who had a load of work that he did, but instead it focuses on how he was amazing and then the state killed him for being gay. Talk about his accomplishments, who he was, and how it all was destroyed later by his being 39 and dating a 19-year-old man when homosexuality was still outlawed in his country. You cheapen the argument and his life by not talking about his accomplishments. Also, still no citations on this, by the way. I did look it up, though, and that guy is legit. Then the author mentions being happy for the age of consent in gay relationships being dropped to 16 eventually. Going into gays around the world, the author again associates transgenderism with only rejecting gender norms. If this is truly what they believe, then no wonder there is such a split between gender dysphoric individuals and those who just want to be atypical in gender expression. It's two very different things, and treating it like just don't want to wear a dress is beyond insulting to me, and how dismissive and diminutive it is for the actual mental anguish people go through with gender dysphoria. Anyway, the book lists countries where they have laws against being gay, then a list of places where you're allowed to be trans. It says to only visit countries who are gay-friendly and donate to gay causes before listing a couple of organizations where you can send your money to. Now it brings up homosexuality versus religious belief, and it does so with absolutely zero respect when it says, quote, although most religious people are somewhat progressive, there are individuals and regimes that insist on clinging to multi-thousand-year-old bits of paper in the name of hate. If you look back at a list of gay illegal countries, they do tend to be the ones where the legal system is tied to the religious regime. Not naming names, but Saudi Arabia, end quote. I have absolutely no faith that the person who wrote this about someone else's religious doctrine is going to be respectful of religious and philosophical differences and isn't at all closed-minded and mean-spirited in talking this subject. Before the book gets into a couple of different religions to consider about how they view homosexuality, the author compares Madonna to a holy leader. proving that the author has no idea or respect for what people consider to be religious figures or leaders, or why they're considered holy. Quote, "The closest thing I personally have to a prophet is Madonna. Now, what if I went around taking everything that she said literally?" End quote. It's not the same, and it shows a lack of understanding and empathy and actual bigotry towards spiritual leaders, teachings, and practices. And you know where a second ago this book mentioned Saudi Arabia as a country that ties religion to regimes? Despite that, in the lists previously in this book, it says, quote, "Let's take a look at the main world religions and examine their traditional views on homosexuality, then transgenderism," end quote. Some of the religions it includes are Hinduism and Buddhism, which it puts together, then Christianity, which it breaks down into Church of England, Catholics, Methodists, Quakers, and Baptists. And by breakdown, I mean it just says yes or no on how they feel about homosexuality. Then it goes, "The Bible is the problem." Here, I took a couple of passages from the King James Version of the Bible and put them in a scary font. Right. I sense no bias here or demonization or anything whatsoever. One of the passages mentioned is Genesis 19:5, quote, "And they called unto Lot and said unto him, Where are the men which came to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them." Author says, in this instance, to know them is thought to mean to bum them. That's all that the author says on that. In the second, it's Jude 1:7. "Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example of suffering the vengeance of eternal fire." The author says, quote, "Strange flesh is thought to mean in the case of bum." Of course, the author doesn't mention what the stories that he's including are about or the situations that are happening in order to demonize people and the practices that he doesn't like. It's insincere. It's like me picking up a Stephen King book, taking a random passage out, presenting it, and then calling those Stephen King's words without telling you the context of the story. It's gross. It's beyond disrespectful, and you don't do this to any religion. Then you got two more quotes from Leviticus before entering a section called How to Argue with Christians, and it starts with, "So if you have the misfortune to stumble upon a literalist, homophobic Christian, how do you go about defending yourself?" It gives how to argue with the passages above and miscategorizes them. I'm really sick of the constant mindset of literally everyone that is respect me, but fuck you. Again, then it takes some random passages from the Bible to then go, oh, these people might be gay. I'm gonna write some gay Bible fan fiction right now, while also disregarding that the Bible is not an instruction manual. It's a historical text, which means it has all kinds of things in it that includes lists of births, lists of lives of all kinds, and there are many things in the Bible that it does not endorse, but they are included as telling the story. There are slaves. Lots of daughters get him drunk in a cave and have sex with him because they think they gotta propagate society again. Doing sections to misinterpret someone's religion is not the peon that you think it is, and anyone who might have been listening to you from that religion might turn off if you're just disrespectful enough, because why are they going to listen to you when there's no respect coming back at them? People in the Bible can be and are dramatic often because they were people. It mentions some books of the Bible that are left out, but it doesn't say why, so don't trust the Bible as a whole, because just trust me on this. The third religion listed is Islam, and barely anything is said about it. A little like the Bible, there's not an awful lot in the Quran that explicitly forbids homosexual behavior. And though it says the teachings of Muhammad and the Hadith are less ambiguous, it doesn't go into what any of them say. This book gives no breakdown to Islam like it did to Christianity, and says that the way to argue with Muslims is to say that the Quran is on their side and disregard the Hadith entirely. It also says most Muslim countries don't kill over homosexuality anyway, so it's fine, don't worry about it. But a side eye to those who do. Yeah, that's all that it says on Islam. The last religion mentioned is Judaism, saying that they are to blame for homophobia, but they're reformed mostly, so it's fine, as long as you stay away from the Orthodox. Then there's a personal story of someone talking about being Christian and gay and how the teachings made them feel bad until they reinterpreted the teachings to make them not feel bad anymore. The book then says that Islam is mostly chill with transgenders, just not prostitution, and Christianity and Judaism are both mean to transgenderism. Then it says that the book of John recognizes that those with birth defects and isn't transgenderism such a birth defect, quote, "I love it when you can actually use the Bible to argue in our favor," end quote. The final note in this chapter is just saying that holy texts are irrelevant because they're old. Chapter 7 is called Coming Out. Introductions here talks about what it means to come out, that some people won't come out, that in some countries it's dangerous to come out. And then it says, but you'll feel really good coming out. You'll love yourself. You'll feel free just to do it. It's like, don't worry. Anyone who cares about you won't have a problem with it whatsoever. And then some people might, or worst case scenario, you get disowned and kicked out. But like, that doesn't happen that often though. The author then tells their story of coming out and then lists other people's stories of them coming out. For some reason, in these situations, they always need to be the most vulgar that they possibly can be. Like, hey mom, bet you'll never guess what I like to put in my butt. After all of these stories, it gives a guide on how to come out. It also asks questions like, do you live in one of these 60 countries where you might be stoned to death for coming out? I thought that wasn't a big problem. Oh wait, as if someone from any of those countries would even be reading this book. I mean, look at the cover. Maybe they are, but also I would be interested in knowing if this book is gay is openly read in Saudi Arabia. The book offers a list of likely objections and answers it, informing readers how to respond, and then saying things like, listen to Lady Gaga to give you strength. Fair enough. The author also says that don't hold it against your family or friends if they need time to process the information. They likely are having a rough time, if they have a rough time, because they're thinking of the hardships that you're going to go through and they need a chance to cope on their own. So let them. It also mentions coming out as trans and how people expect physical transformations if you come out as trans. It says go to some online resources if you're under 18 and then print out that information and take it to your doctor so you can tell them what you need them to do for you because that seems legitimate. Just here, 14-year-old child, tell this doctor who's got the experience what to do. It says an earlier step is hormones with some irreversible effects, but it doesn't mention what those effects are, and then also mentions surgeries without really going into how invasive those are. It mentions most FTMs, which is the female to male transgenders. It mentions female to male transgenders do not typically get bottom surgery, but that's because of recovery time. It doesn't talk about the surgeries themselves. So no mention of the risks or the outcome or any of the medical procedures. Then it mentions pronoun switching and then someone's story about coming out as a male to female transgender and transitioning. Chapter 8 is called Where to Meet People Like You. This chapter introduces itself by mentioning how LGBT is the minority, so meeting people to get romantic with them might be harder, but it's not impossible. It goes into teaching about how to use a gaydar, which it first starts off by saying, read those stereotypes, baby. They're not bad anymore, I guess. Then look for eye contact, and physical contact means interest. It mentions nightclub scenes and gay club scenes, saying not every gay uses them, but also people in the rural areas might not even have these resources. No one wants to be identified as a scene queen, even if they are. Call it internal homophobia. It spends a decent amount of time talking about bars and clubs for 18+ audiences when this book isn't about that, isn't targeted for that. It also talks about going to school clubs and local groups where they give out condoms, lube, and advice. This wouldn't be an issue if this book wasn't targeted to children. It again mentions moving from rural to city for the clubs, but there are other ways to meet people. And then it goes through a list of how to pull or draw someone over to you when flirting. Now it goes into an FAQ, starting with, why is the gay scene so druggy? It says, yeah, it is, but also no one is forcing you to do drugs. So like if you're just given drugs, you could say no. Beware that some drugs in the gay scene are illegal, and that can get you a record. So that's pretty much all that says. Meeting somebody through mutual friends is also brought up as another meeting place. It mentions online dating and then applications. And then it goes on to say, quote, it is a fact that although grown-up adult types are sometimes looking for a serious relationship, sometimes they are just looking for a spot of sexy fun time. You may come to establish that gay or bi men in particular do seem to quite like sex. Okay, nearly everyone likes sex, but gay guys really seem to have cornered the market, end quote. It introduces Grindr specifically, putting in bold letters a minimum age of 18, and then tells the reader exactly how to use Grindr and what it's for. How can you put this in a book that you know is marketed to children because you can't even say sex, you have to say sexy fun time, which is also manipulative, and then you say how to use a sex app? Why not just other places to meet people include apps, but don't worry about those until you're an adult because it's illegal. Which you don't even have to say that, but just don't worry about that until later. No, this is grooming to include stuff like this. Quote, now, not everyone on a sex app is there for sex. Like a website, it's just another way to meet like-minded guys or girls, end quote. While this statement is true, the majority of people on specifically a sex app, not a dating app, a sex app, are looking for sex. And the previous paragraph literally just said that everyone likes sex and gays corner the market. So what are you doing here, my dude? Quote, if you're using a sex app though, be honest if you're looking for sex. People will meet you if you chat with them, it says. Yeah, this isn't sketchy at all. And then you go on to, and then it goes into a couple of personal stories about the pros and the cons of using a sex app to show a debate between that. And both in the pro side and the con side, it mentions how everybody on the sex app is looking for sex. All of them. It just depends on whether they see it as a pro or a con, but all of them mention it. It says that sex apps are dangerous, but the only way to bang is to meet people. So it gives tips like put your face on your profile, expect to be asked for pics, wear a condom, meet in public. If you're under 18 and sharing nude pics, that's a crime, and say no if you really don't want to meet someone. The book talks about how dating is meant to get to know if you've got anything in common with that other person while you're out. It asks the questions of who pays on a gay date before saying it's curiously medieval that on straight dates, men usually are expected to pay, and then goes BT dubs, generosity is attractive, so offer to pay. Maybe that's why men like to pay on straight dates, to, you know, impress their date with generosity. I'm just saying. Chapter 9 is called The Ins and Outs of Gay Sex. This chapter starts out by shaming schools for not teaching you about gay sex intercourse in details when you were 11 years old. Then it goes into some political trash of, quote, people made it illegal and why can't you talk to kids about sex? I didn't know what sex was at 11 because of it. I thought that it was just rubbing bums, quote, end quote. Bro, I thought for the longest time, well past 11, that sex was just kissing and being naked on bed together in the dark. That's it. So that's not anything against you, and that's not anything specifically against gays. It's just, you don't need to know that level of detail of sex at 11 years old. It at least says that porn isn't sexual education because it's fake. There's a section called Doing the Sex, and here is a literal step-by-step introduction on hand jobs, blow jobs, and anal sex. Quote, 1. Handies. Perhaps the most important skill that you will master as a gay or bi man is the timeless classic, the hand job. The good news is you can practice on yourself. The bad news is each guy has become very used to his own way of getting himself off. Learning how to find your partner's personal style can take ages. Learning how to find your partner's personal style can take ages, but it can be very rewarding when you do. Something they don't teach you in schools is that in order to be able to come at all, you or your partner need to finish off with handies. A lot of people find it hard to come through other types of sex. This is fine, and certainly not something that you have to apologize for. A good handy is all about the wrist action. Rub the head of his cock back and forth with your hand. Try different speeds and pressures until he responds positively. A bad handy is grasping a todger and shaking it like a ketchup bottle. Finally, my misunderstanding about rubbing two peens together wasn't far off the mark. Rubbing them together in one hand feels amazing. Mega combo handy, trademark pending. End quote. This is not the only detailed description in this book, and I mention it specifically because we've already covered sex apps, and the book is at least confirmable in middle schools. Does it go younger? I don't know. This book also includes step-by-step to pooping and douching before anal sex guide, and tops versus bottom sex lubrication at different forms of lesbian sex. Then there's a detailed description of lesbian sex and experiences from somebody else who comes in to talk specifically about her experiences. Way more detailed than any sex ed class I'd ever really seen presented to children. Quote, actually, really lastly, on reflection, I don't think girl-on-girl sex is any different to any other type of sex. If you just listen to what your body wants, what turns you on, and are never ashamed to ask for it, and if you experiment wherever possible, explore every corner of your desire, even if you only do it once, then you'll learn what you love and what you don't want, and voila, you'll be enjoying sexy sex in no time. End quote. An 11-year-old does not need this. And why is the person writing putting this message to dildo manufacturers in an educational book for children? Quote, why do they always put veins on dildos? It's gross. 2, note to manufacturers, vibrators do not need to be shaped like penises. End quote. This book and stuff like this is insanely inappropriate for the venue and the purported intended audience. Go ahead, call me a prude. This does not need to be handed to children. Sorry, not sorry. The book then starts talking about role-playing, dominant versus sub. The author straight up says top and bottom is important if I'm on sex app because I'm there for sex. But earlier you tried to say that sex apps weren't just for sex. So you're kind of just contradicting yourself, trying to cover all the bases. This turns into a confessional again of someone talking about their sexual role-play experiences for 11-year-olds. Then it goes into transgender sex, saying most people don't fall in love with genitalia. It talks in depth about the expectations of sex, and some people get off with just words and without touching. Then there's talking about fetishizing male to females or talking about gay sex with male to female transgenders. Then it goes on about why are gays so slutty, and explains that just gays are more horny than everyone else and always hooking up, and gay men who responded to the author's survey were the only ones who had ever said they had more than 100 partners listed. This book also suggests that the only reason to be monogamous is for evolutionary reasons. Otherwise, there's no purpose. There are some reasons given why gays might be more promiscuous, including testosterone makes you horny, normalized/supported behavior, misogyny, and shame or validation through sex. Then it goes into a brief overview of a bunch of STDs, longer than the section with HIV and AIDS, but still nothing about bug chasing. But also for the record, droning on about STDs like this really doesn't mean anything, let alone droning on to a child. Because, like, I'm an adult, and the level of droning on about STDs didn't mean anything to me. Then there's a confessional from a guy who got HIV and says, well, you know, I might have HIV and be taking drugs for it, but most of the guys that you know who say they aren't HIV positive are probably lying to you because most of us are HIV positive. I'm just nice enough to tell you. And if I could turn the clock back and do things differently, nah, I wouldn't, because I like my life. End quote. Follow that up with, of course, we're going to talk about STDs, and then follow that up with talking about saunas and sex parties. This is literally not the same thing as sex ed. This is kink ed, is what this is. At the end of this chapter, it says, sex and love are not the same. Sex isn't intimate. It's just bumping in the dark. Love is meaning in your partner. Chapter 10 is called Nesting. This chapter sets up about moving in with your partner. The book asks, well, why would you want to be in a relationship? The reason it gives are love, companionship, comfort, sex, security, and financial benefits. Then you've got the tips of not being in a relationship is better than being in a bad relationship. Watch out for bad people, then monogamous versus promiscuity. It demonizes monogamy and calls it a Christian construct that only belongs to Christians. Quote, there's a very strong argument to suggest that monogamy is a societal or religious construct. Remember how I said most mammals don't mate for life? And you can pretty much track the rise of monogamy around the globe with Christian missionaries. The same route, by the way, they took to tell people that same-sex activity was wrong. End quote. Other reasons why monogamy might be the norm is jealousy and just society stops at one person in general in stories. This book then goes on to say that there is one universal truth that makes monogamy hard to believe, and that's that everyone wants to have sex with loads of people, and if you say otherwise, you are a liar. This author is so close-minded it's not even funny. I would like to have sex with only one person. My husband. Am I there yet? No. Am I bothered by it? No. You're welcome for that tidbit of information. Quote, however, all people, gay or otherwise, must recognize that there is one universal truth of the universe. We all want to have sex with loads of people. Allow me to explain. We don't all want to cheat on our partners or be promiscuous, but, and please correct me if I'm wrong, although I know you're lying, when we see someone we fancy, we can't help but fancy them. Short of scooping out our eyes with melon ballers, there is little that we can do about this. End quote. This is the kind of thing that will give people complexes and think something is wrong with them if they don't want to have sex all the time with whoever they think is attractive, or just by not being able to spot people that they go, I want to fuck that. This isn't normal. Stop trying to pressure everyone into being sex addicts. This is ridiculous, dude, and disgusting. People assign different meaning to sex. For me, it is a combination of two souls, which is why it is something that I will only ever do with my husband. It will be one person, and I don't ever have that urge to jump people's bones. Because it is such an intimate act that is fueled by emotion and feeling and a desire to be closer to that person. Acting like this is a gross misdirection, and it is lying to people. And then you call other people liars for not being as horny as you. It is insane. This dude is ridiculous and disgusting for that alone. Then it goes into the politics of gay marriage, something it leaves out of the idea of marriage is it being a religious institution. All it says is that marriage is a social construct. It doesn't explain why it might be done in churches, even though it is mentioned that it is done in churches. This is disingenuous in my opinion. The next section of this chapter is about how gay people have babies while he talks down to the reader about it. Quote, "I hope it doesn't come off as a surprise to you that 2 men or 2 women need help conceiving." End quote. Also, this author says that this is a matter of equality. I think that we need to analyze the situation a little bit. In a straight relationship, you have both parts of the for baby making naturally. In a situation where you're missing one of the necessary parts to make a baby, to call it a human right is to claim that you have a right to someone else's body. I understand the innate desire to have children, to want to raise a family, but you do not have a right to someone else's body. Even in a straight relationship, you don't have a right to your partner's body. So just because you want kids does not mean you have a right to someone else's body. There's a quote in here that pretends men and women don't bring different things to the table, and I understand if you don't believe that there are biological or psychological or emotional differences between men and women, then it won't really mean anything to you. However, I have difficulty understanding how you can believe that there is no difference between men and women and also say that transgender exists. Because how could someone feel like they're in the incorrect body or that they live outside of a binary if there is no distinction to be had? It goes into how gay couples might get children. One way is through sperm donors, another is co-parenting, surrogacy, and adoption. While it says adoption is legal for gay parents, it puts out children needing adoption often come with behavioral issues, so they are less desirable. Then there's a story of someone who got children via surrogacy inserted in here. Chapter 11 is called Hats. This chapter just says that you're not only gay, you're a lot of other things and references intersectionality. It then says how you have to determine your sexuality for yourself, and you got to figure out more for yourself because there's more to life than where your next orgasm comes from. Then it says the hardest chapter to write of this book was the political one, and then it gives a call to action for anyone LGBT to take action. Chapter 12 is a guide to recognizing your gay saints. This chapter just lists a lot of gay people, movies, and characters with the assumption that, quote, as gays, we all agree on these people, end quote. Porn stars are mentioned, and so is Cher's vagina. Wouldn't matter if it wasn't aimed at kids, because that's obviously a joke, but then it just gives a list of rules of who you are allowed to support and who you're not allowed to support if you're LGBT. Then the extra chapter at the end is called Build a Bridge. This chapter is talking directly to parents and caregivers, basically insulting them by saying, do you have a problem with gays? Well, you better not anymore because your kid just might be gay, end quote. I just want to say that I don't think anyone willingly purchasing this book for their own education is doing it because they hate gays and that they need to be told not to hate them and to hide their child. And then being rude to somebody who is reaching out, who is trying to educate themselves or better understand the issues, to be rude to them and go, well, if you're worried about your son, hate to break it to you, but even your straight people that they do bum sex, which also another assumption. Do we need to be constantly insulting? Do we need to be constantly degrading? Do we need to constantly be trying to make people feel bad in order to get them to your side? I'm sorry, but if I hadn't already thought this author was an asshole, this last chapter at the parents, while talking it down to them, would have ensured it. Then there's a huge section at the end that is a bunch of advice these people wish that their parents knew before they came out, and it continues to have individuals talk down to parents. Some of them are more reasonable than others, but it concludes with a cheat sheet of sex words, websites, and phone numbers to be contacted for LGBT stuff. And that is the entirety of this book. So in closing, since I gave you all that information, and I would love to hear your opinion on the contents of the book, for me, this book read like the audience was much younger than 14. It talks down to the audience, but that also talks down to the audience even if they're adults. So it sounds like the author has an ego and thinks they're better and know better than everybody else. I don't understand who this book is for because of the way that it is. This book is so full of contradictions that you can't actually get a clear idea of anything it's trying to talk about. If you go back to what the description of the book was, it doesn't really tell you what it's like to be gay or to come out as gay. It is literally an instruction manual and insults. Detailed sex instructions. And this book is presented with biased opinions without contrary and constant political positioning instead of giving various opinions, which another thing that would have actually been helpful to give an idea of being gay doesn't have to stop you is go and collect a list of these figures that did amazing things, like the guy that was mentioned in here from World War II, and list his accomplishments and who he was and how his identification or his sexual interest, that it didn't stop him from doing great things until he was arrested. So make a story of his life and the tragedy of how his contributions were ended because of the treatment from the state. But the way that this is presented is just, it's garbage to me. I don't think it belongs in schools for a variety of reasons. It's a really shit book with no clear audience, and it's grooming material. I have no problem saying that. This is 100% grooming. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?